Hi, I'm Kathy from the Delafield Quilt Company, and today I'm going to show you how to make this little zipper pouch. This little guy is super quick to make, and I think you're going to want to make many of them. So to make this bag, we're going to need some materials. The first thing is a zipper. This is a 7-inch zipper. The actual zip part is the 7 inches, then it comes with a tail on each end that make it a total of 9 inches in length. But the package will read 7 inches. And then we need some fabric. I've chosen some of the prints from the Bookish Collection from Art Gallery Fabrics. It's just stunning. So if you haven't checked that one out yet, you should. So the pieces that you need to make this bag are pretty simple. You're going to need 2 pieces that are 4 inches by 9 inches. I'm going to call this fabric A. And then you need 2 more pieces that are 3 inches by 9 inches. I'm going to call that fabric B. And then from your fabric A, you're also going to need 4 of these smaller pieces, and these are 1 inch by 2 inches. For the lining, you're going to need 2 pieces as well. This is also from the Bookish Collection. And this is going to be 9 inches by 6.5 inches. So you need 2 rectangles. You also need some batting. You're going to need 2 rectangles of batting, and this needs to be a little bit bigger than 9 inches and a little bit bigger than 6.5 inches. So you need 2 of those. And then for tools, a ruler, a rotary cutter. You're also going to need a marking pen, or this is a chalk one that's fabric friendly. And some binding clips would be helpful as well, and a few pins. You also need your ironing and ironing board. Okay, I'm going to set this aside and we'll go ahead and get started. So the first thing we need to do is to sew our fabric B rectangles to our fabric A rectangles. I'm just going to put a few pins in here just to secure it and line it up. And we're going to use a 1/4 inch sewing seam right along the top edge here. Okay, now that I got my 2 pieces sewn together, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to press the seam to the larger piece side. You could use a little starch here if you wanted to as well. Make sure it's nice and straight and flat. Okay, once your pieces are pressed open like this, then you're going to add the batting. I'm not going to use a backing on this since I'm using this real thin batting that works in my machine just fine. You could add a piece of backing if you'd like. So I'm just going to mark a diagonal line right down one of the centers, and then I'm going to mark one down the other. And that's just going to be a starting guide for where my quilting lines are going to go. And then from that point, once I sew on these first lines, I'm just going to use my quilting foot just to repeat the lines across the whole piece. Okay, now I'm ready to quilt. I'm going to use a big stitch on this just to make the quilting go a little bit faster. And then for the first round, I'm just going to quilt right on the chalk lines that I made earlier. Now that I got one side done, I'm going to go around and do the other corner, and then I'm going to change the position of my needle so I can use my sewing foot as the quilting lines. Okay, so I've made my first quilting lines. Now I'm going to switch my needle position all the way to the left, and then I'm going to use my foot as the guide for this quilting. You can really quilt this whatever way you'd like, but this one I just think looks pretty classy. You're just going to keep turning around your piece using your foot against the last sewing line. Before you know it, you have this whole little piece quilted. Alright, so I have my 2 pieces quilted, and now I just need to clean up the edges. Okay, now that these are nice and cleaned up, I'm just going to set those aside, and now I'm going to work on preparing the zipper. So we're going to add some fabric tabs to these zippers just to make it look a little bit more finished. To do that, it might be helpful just to pin your zipper ends in place, just so you don't have that bulky zipper. And we're going to take 2 of our rectangles, and we're going to sew them right sides together on top of the zipper. I'll just leave a little bit of the zipper hanging out. I'm going to clip that in place. And when you're sewing it, just make sure that you are far away from that very end. We're going to push the fabric back up to that after it's sewn. But for now, I'm just going to probably sew right to the edge of where I have the clip. It may be helpful to use a zipper foot. I cannot find mine, so I'm going to just use my sewing machine regular foot, and I'm just going to be real careful as I'm sewing this in place. And then we'll do the same thing on the other end. Flip it in place. And again, when you're sewing it, just make sure you don't sew over this metal part. Okay, now that we've got these sewn on, I'm just going to flip these over. And I'm going to move the fabric up a little bit. Probably about 1/8 of an inch or so from the actual end of the zipper. I'm going to clip that in again. And I'm going to just sew a finishing stitch right on top there, or a top stitch. I'm going to repeat that on the other side. I'm going to push the fabric up just a little bit so it's a little bit closer to the zipper. Finger press it. Then again, I'm going to top stitch right on this edge here. All right, so now I've got the ends finished on the zipper. Now I'm going to just trim the edges. I want the zipper ends to line up with the panel that we're using for the outside of the bag. So I'm just going to center it as best as I can. And then you can measure it out too. I'm just going to eyeball it here. And I'm just going to trim off these extra edges. And same on the other side. Okay. So now we're ready to start sewing on the zipper to the panels. We're going to need our lining fabric at this time. Okay, for the first part, we're going to just flip the right side of the zipper to the right side of the first outside panel. Make sure it's lined up with the top. I am keeping the zipper partially open. Actually, I'm going to open it a little bit further, because once it's all sewn together, we're going to use that as our way to kind of get the bag open and turn it inside out. So right sides together on the zipper, and then I'm going to lay right side down of the lining fabric right on top of that, and I just need to line all the edges at the top here together. And then I'm going to just clip these in place. I'm using these magic clips that are great because they're a little bit longer than regular binding clips, and your sewing foot can actually go over the metal. And maybe one more. Okay. So I'm going to then sew a 1/4 inch seam right along here. Again, your foot can go over these, but you can't actually sew on the metal, so I'm just going to move these up a little bit. Make sure both your lining and the outside fabric are lined up, and I'm going to sew that seam. Alright, so I've got the zipper sewn on the first part, and now I'm just going to flip it open. And I'm going to just give this a quick press just to help keep the lining and the outer fabric down a little bit. Okay, so I'm folding these open, and I'm just going to finger press it first. And then I'm going to take my iron and I'm just going to carefully press that a little bit further. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a top stitching right on the top here. Okay, and I'm just going to put the top stitching on. I'm going to be careful not to sew too close to that zipper. Take it just nice and slow. Okay, now that we've got the first side on, we're going to repeat the process with the other panel. Make sure that when you're sewing this, your A fabrics are both to the zipper, so you don't end up with a flip bag. So same process here. We're going to put the right side of the zipper to the right side of fabric A. I'm just going to put a few clips in there just to hold it for now. And then we're going to put the right side of the lining to the back side of the zipper. Make sure that you line them all at the top, just like we did before. So top of zipper, top of the first panel. And clip it a few times in place. And then we're going to sew a 1/4 inch just like we did another one. Okay, now we're going to sew our 1/4 inch again. Okay, I've got the other side sewn, and now I'm going to press it like I did before, and then I'm going to put the top stitching in. I'm going to finger press it first, then I'm going to come back over with the iron. And it's okay if your lining fabric isn't perfect with your top. They're not going to be sewn together. So if they're off a little bit, that's okay. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead and top stitch on this one. Okay, now that we've got both sides top stitched, we want to again make sure our zipper is partially open so we can turn the bag side inside out. And now we're going to sew the sides and the bottom together. So right sides of the fabric A and fabric B panels, we're going to sew those first. The little tab part that you have in here, you want to fold that towards the lining fabric. And then just make sure your edges of the outer shell are matching, and make sure your seams for the two A and B pieces match as well. And you're just going to clip or pin that in place. I'm going to do that all the way around. And then for the lining, pretty much the same thing. I'm just going to clip the edges a little bit. Just to keep those in place. So now that this is all clipped in place, we're going to go ahead and start sewing this. We're going to sew around the perimeter of the entire piece, but we're going to leave a gap up here on the lining fabric, and that should probably be about 2 to 3 inches of a gap. So I'm going to go ahead using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to go start sewing around here. Okay, once you have it sewn, we're going to turn it inside out. This is where it's important to have that zipper open. And it may be helpful to have a blunt object to poke those corners out. And the last step is just to sew shut the hole that we left in the lining fabric. And I'm just going to use the sewing machine to top stitch on that once I have it folded in and pinned down a little bit. I'm just going to stitch to close it. Let the hole sewn. I'm just going to push that in there to get the lining in the bag. Just like that, we have a little zipper pouch. Thank you for joining us today at the Delafield Quilt Company. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you did, please subscribe and see the rest of our videos. Have a great day.